Amazing win for former British champion Zak Chelli over David Morrell. Big upset here on the Wardley versus Dubois undercard. And, at first glance, it's definitely one of those upsets that's, of course, iconic for, a lesser-known fighter upsetting somebody who, the announcers kept saying was a two-weight world champion, but he definitely didn't win two world titles in the ring. I'm fairly sure that his second world title, at least, was an interim title, which he lost to David Benavidez. And to me, it's more of an example of, I was thinking throughout this fight, what's wrong with Morrell? Because I, like a lot of people, expected David Morrell to come through with a knockout here, and I just thought that Zak Chelli, while being a tricky fighter, while being a tough customer, I was just sort of expecting that over the course of the fight that he was going to get broken down. And through the middle rounds of the fight, Morrell was dominating, and I certainly thought that the end of the fight we were going to get that. We were going to see Chelli get broken down and Morrell's power come through. But Morrell's power never really came through in this fight, and that's not just, relative to his inability to break Chelli down as the rounds wore on. I mean that in terms of in terms of the power on his individual shots, didn't really seem like it was there. And, I think it's another demonstration of how great fighters and losing to a great fighter, and how a loss to a truly great fighter like David Benavidez for a fighter like David Morrell, can break you down. How it can take away, if you have good power, it can neutralize that and take that away from you, right? He lost, he got a split draw to a fighter named Imam Kahatev, I believe his name, Iman Kahatev, on the undercard of Shiraz's KO of Berlanga in Queens last year. He didn't look great in that fight. He didn't look like he had a ton of power. I remember watching that fight and going, like, this is all the power that David Morrell has, because I was under the impression that David Morrell was a power puncher, and that didn't really seem to be the case. And it just feels to me like maybe it was the transition from super middleweight to light heavyweight, and I'm making too much of it to be about Benavidez and what Benavidez did to Morrell. Because Benavidez didn't knock out Morrell or anything. It was a decision, but he still bludgeoned Morrell plenty. It was not the best night of Morrell's life, and it wouldn't. It would be the kind of performance where if you're a power puncher like Morrell, a fighter who maybe, on a good night has a similar, combination style, power punching to Benavidez, and now seeing what his hands look like now and what his skill set looks like now, it's sort of like comparative over analysis, right? You go in there with somebody who's sort of a better version of the fighter that you are, the ultimate version of the fighter that you are, Benavidez to Morrell, and it just kind of neutralizes your skill set. It makes you critical and second thinking just against anybody, against any opponent. You're overanalyzing and overthinking. It's a bad place to be for a fighter, and that's where Morrell is right now. And if he can move back down to super middleweight, I kind of doubt that's possible. He's a pretty big dude, but he's definitely not a big light heavyweight. He's small for a light heavyweight. This was a small fight for light heavyweights. It kind of looked like a middleweight fight. So I don't really know what the future is like for Zak Chelli, because this is my first time seeing him fight, to be honest with you. He's good with range control. He's good with tempo control. He's definitely a very high IQ fighter, and he's clearly got some power and some ability in the pocket as well. Former British champion, and also showed good head movement in there, and did a pretty good job of, tracking down Morrell when Morrell would try to run away, which was a pretty consistent thing that happened in this fight. So I was impressed by Zak Chelli, and it was an incredible knockout. I really didn't think it was going to happen. I really didn't think Chelli was going to get it done, but he did. And I was afraid he would run out of gas there in the first half of that last round, but he definitely didn't. He was just looking for the right shot, and he found it eventually, and he knocked Morrell out standing up, but Morrell was definitely unconscious. He was just being propped up by the ropes, and the fact that his back was on the ropes. It was definitely a very clear stoppage from the ref, and not something I was mad about at all. A very impressive win by Zak Chelli, but I question, there's some guys with real hands and real tenacity who haven't lost that it factor that Morrell seems to have lost at this point. So I think Chelli might be in trouble against, higher ranking people in the light heavyweight division, because, like the commentator said, this is a boost from him up from British level to world level. It's a massive moment in his career, and he pursued it, thusly. And, I think there's three factors going on here. I made a big deal of the whole Benavidez thing, but I also think there's the weight issue for Morrell and also motivation issue, I guess that does tie in a little bit with the Benavidez issue, but it's also a separate issue in and of itself. That I think this is, a classic case that boxing fans love of, a fighter that might be struggling with motivation a little bit against a guy that is not struggling with motivation at all. Chelli, clearly a very, very motivated fighter who is, whether or not he's earned a place on the world stage, it's not really up to me or up to the matchmakers, because that's the way that this game works, man. If you land a big KO like that on a big card, the opportunities will absolutely be there for you, and I'm definitely willing to watch another Zak Chelli fight, even if I have questions about his future in the division and much bigger questions about David Morrell. But it's going to be very interesting to see where these two guys' careers go from here, and this can happen on an undercard. This is what's great about fighting. This is what's great about boxing. It's going to be really interesting to see where these two guys' careers go from here, and I've got this marked down in my book that I score fights on as a great fight. And one day you guys are going to see a video where I go through that book where I score fights, and I go through all the fights that I marked down as a great fight, and we're going to go back over this fight and remember this fight. And there are going to be, fight fans like me who remember this fight for a long time and who, follow these guys' careers because of, our memory of this fight. So that's what's great about fighting. Yeah, like and subscribe for more fight content. I'll be back on at the next one, probably with a Daniel Dubois versus Fabio Wardley recap, because this card is still going on.